Live. Okay, now we're live. Welcome, everyone. This is I Need Living Conversations. We are streaming live. This is Julian Catari from Jalapa, Veracruz, and I get together with Blue Heron Woman, who is in Indianola, Oklahoma, and we talk every week about different subjects. And today's subject is a continuation of last week's subject, time and the technosphere. And today we're going to get into the pentagram of the tecnosphere, which is some sort of 5-point key subject, maybe different 5 things that drive the technosphere. That's what I'm trying to guess.
Yeah.
I find it a very, very interesting and captivating conversation, and always talking about the matrix or about the system or about in this session, the technosphere is always very, very interesting to me, because it's important to know what we are facing and what we're dealing with. And if we don't, we're just being fooled.
Yeah.
So that's why it's so important in the path of freedom. And if you wish to know more about that, stick around till the end to know what we do and what we propose for a true freedom situation, to reach absolute freedom, because there's no other. I was writing today on my Mayan readings, and I came to the conclusion that for full health, you cannot expect to have health, plentiful health, if you don't have freedom. If your freedom is taken from you, even if you don't see the direct physical connection, right? If you're being stolen, if you're being robbed, if you're being controlled, then it affects your health somehow.
Well, it's as simple as having a tower, a 5G tower 300 feet from your house. That's not freedom. You can't be healthy.
That's it. So that's why we need to set up these ranches and these marcas and this land and all of that, which we kind of speak about, but we won't get into that right now, because we need to get into understanding the 5 elements that drive this technosphere. And you're going to tell us about that.
The pentagram of the technosphere that turned into the physical building of the Pentagon.
Okay. Yeah, that's really intriguing, really, really interesting, captivating.
So number 1 is commodity production.
Okay.
The basis of the entire world market as a biospheric system refers to the transformation of natural resources through industrial means into consumer products. Commodity production alone counts for the complex of industrialization that brings the world market and the technosphere into existence. The post-World War II growth of the world market necessitated the establishment of the World Trade Center, a global complex, with its principal coordinating unit being the Twin Towers in New York City, home of the World Trade Institute and the corporate offices of the New York Stock Exchange. The second part of this pentagram, 5-pointed star, represents the human social organism or marketplace for accommodating the production and consumption of industrial goods. So civilization is city life as it has evolved. While prior to industrialization, the city depended on a healthy agrarian economy for its support, industrialization pushed the city to new heights of artificiality. The biggest component of this artificiality is round-the-clock lighting system that allows for 24-hour consumer markets. As such, the city then is the nucleus of the technospheric system, the hub of its commodity production, of its energy consumption, and of its transport and communication empires. The growth of the cities around the world is exponential in the second half of the 20th century, reflecting the triumph of the technosphere. So in 56 years of the technosphere, the human population almost tripled from 2.2 million to 6.2 billion.
Wow.
Yeah. The third arm of the star, the pentagram, is energy. The tremendous needs of industrial production have transformed the natural energy processes of the biosphere into gigantic artificial complexes for the production of energy to maintain factory and city alike. These systems include coal, oil, and fossil fuels in general, as well as hydropower and nuclear energy. Number 4, transport. Without the highly industrialized transport systems, the commodity production, the vitality of the cities, and the access to provisions of fuel required for the energy systems would collapse. No sooner had industrial production begun in the early 18th century than the first artificial transport systems came into being. The steam or coal-driven locomotive, the giant transoceanic shipping lines. By the 20th century, the railroad system and the worldwide shipping industry were supplemented by the invention of the combustion engine, which made trucking possible. Following World War II, rocketry and jet propulsion established the transportation of the great airline companies of the second half of the 20th century. And number 5, communication. From telegraph to telephone, radio, television, then fax, cell phone, and the internet, the industrial area technologies with their electronic instantaneity have created the vast communication networks and media empires that keep the world humming and promote globalization above all. With this comes propaganda marketing on behalf of consumerism. And marketing is the use of mass communication to control the mind of the consumer. So from the biospheric perspective, this pentagram complex of the technosphere is a whole unit. All of them came into being together to establish the structure and operating procedures of the technosphere. Because of these 5 components, the technosphere is also a pentagon, which led to the actual building. The Pentagon was designed in the 1930s to house the U.S. Department of War. Its construction occurred in the years 1941 through 1943. And I've just been talking to you about the 76-year cycle, which if you go back 76 years from 2025 puts us in 1944. So, right?
Okay.
So the Pentagon, its construction occurred in the years 1941 to 1943. The ending of a world to start a new one. In an old neighborhood of pawn shops and bars called Hell's Bottom. When it was built, it was the world's largest office buildings, and then the Twin Towers became the tallest. So if there were 2 central points to what is known as the military-industrial complex, it's the Pentagon and the World Trade Centers. In remembering that the Gregorian calendar repeats in 28-year cycles, we have seen that the 56-year cycle of the technosphere from 1945 to 2001 was preceded by the 44-year cycle of the proto-technosphere. The 2 world wars were a function of the proto-technosphere, the initial, with the final major acts being the construction of the Pentagon and the Twin Towers. Specifically for consolidating the American war machine in the world's largest office building means that the world's largest business is war. The 56 years between Hiroshima and the collapse of the Twin Towers were the age of terror, for it was atomic terror that initiated the biosphere in a baptism of nuclear fire. The technosphere, not biosphere. Sorry. So the final collapse of the technosphere is the final war between blood and money. And artificial time has run out. And the interesting thing about this is I just watched a YouTube video last week on the fact that money started from trying to prevent blood feuds. So the final collapse of the technosphere is also the final war between blood and money.
Okay, blood and money.
So We have the cycle of the bomb from 1945 through 1951. This first dynamic 7-year cycle, the triple event of the first test of the atomic bomb and its 2 detonations at Hiroshima and Nagasaki, the biosphere was altered by the introduction of radiation from the detonations. Not only that, the blast, right? Mm-hmm. And unfortunately, that wasn't isolated. There have been many, many more experimental detonations after that. There were still 36 years ago when Saturn and Neptune last conjuncted. There were lots of detonations going on. Hmm. The tecnosphere was established in this cycle from 1945 through 1951, and humans created the first weapon of absolute mass destruction. Within 2 years, Mahatma Gandhi, the world's foremost pacifist, was assassinated. And as he famously said, just because I'm pacifist doesn't mean I'm passive. Mm-hmm. So a free India was then partitioned into 3 parts: India, Pakistan, and what later became Bangladesh. In 1947, the Iron Curtain between communist Eastern Europe and the West turns enmity. The enmity between the 2 major powers, the Soviet Union and capitalist America, into the Cold War. So the subsequent formation of NATO in 1949, the military cartel now has the task of keeping World War III from happening by providing a forum where the superpowers can keep their Cold War from heating up and manage the spread of nuclear power. However, soon Russia, the UK, France, and China get the bomb. War in Indochina, the establishment of the Israeli state in Palestine at the expense of the sovereignty of the Palestinian people, the completion of the Chinese Marxist Revolution were the highlights of 1949, followed by the Korean War in 1950. And remember, we go back 76 years. We're going back to 49. Mm-hmm. At the same time, in 1949, commercial television production begins in the U.S. The age of the radio is replaced by the tube. Americans also begin building freeways and the new system of interstate highways, marking the triumph of the automobile culture and the beginning of the suburban consumer lifestyle. And now we have in every city these big, huge air bridges going up, which is what Jaime is working on. These multi-tiered, huge ass. Right.
What are they for?
For driving on. Okay. You're to handle more traffic.
Okay.
So you're driving on a highway way the fuck up there, and there's another one below you, and another one over there. They're all major feet above the ground, and if they collapse, you ain't coming out of that alive. So the next stage was the beginning of the space age, which was 1952 to 1958. In 1953, the super hydrogen bomb, H-bomb, was tested. The DNA code was discovered as our Mother Earth's radiation belts, the Van Allen belts. The U.S. and Russia conduct numerous nuclear weapons tests in Nevada, Siberia, and the Pacific Ocean. And in 1956, the Russians launched the first Sputnik. The UN tables the issue of calendar reform, closing the chapter that began when the League of Nations proposed calendar reform in 1931. From the Gregorian to a 28-day lunar calendar. Mm-hmm. The year 1956 also marks the electronic pop culture of the technosphere known as rock and roll. And by the end of this cycle, the space race joins the arms race as a force. Commercial airlines adapt to jet propulsion, and the great age of air travel begins, with the airport to become the centerpiece of globalization. The first computer corporation, IBM, announces the beginning of what is to become the major technology of globalization, and McDonald's opened. Mm. We talked about that before. Remember the corporation Outlasting? The person who started it? McDonald's has now been around nearly 76 years.
Okay.
You can guarantee the person who started it is no longer living.
Yeah.
So Cycle 3, 1959 through 1965, the cycle of atomic mind explosion. So in July 26 of 1959, the Cuban Revolution of Fidel Castro heightens the Cold War. That same year, the Chinese communists bring to a definitive end the rule of the Dalai Lama in Tibet, and he had to go into hiding. In the Congo, the popular hero Patrice Lumumba is assassinated by the CIA, by the MKUltra program. In 1961, the Institute of Mathematics of the Siberian branch of the Soviet Army Academy of Sciences begins the monumental mathematical analysis of the Mayan hieroglyphic texts. The attempt at 1961 Bay of Pigs invasion of Cuba is followed in 1963 with the assassination of John F. Kennedy, and Martin Luther King Jr. then emerged as the popular hero of nonviolence and civil rights, culminating in 1965 with the Watts race riot. And Rachel Carson's book, Silent Spring, signals the rise of ecological awareness. She's the one that brought DDT to a halt. With her book. The Beatles transformed rock and roll into world-class cultural phenomena, followed by the LSD hippies, which were all put on by the CIA, and the anti-war movement against the conflict in Vietnam. In 1961, the Vatican Ecumenical Council comes to the conclusion that the best way the church will survive the next century is through a strong pope. It also included an appendix on calendar reform, which denied calendar reform and sealed the tecnosphere within the confines of Gregorian time. 1966 through 1972, we have the triumph of the world market. 1966, construction began on the World Trade Center, while in 1968, the World Trade Centers are independently established in Houston, New Orleans, and Tokyo. The years 1967 through 69 included race riots, anti-war riots, a march on the Pentagon, the assassinations of Martin Luther King Jr. and Robert Kennedy, as well as the Maoist Cultural Revolution in China. And the Woodstock concert marks the apex of the early rock and roll culture. And the 28-year cycle ends with a whimper. The technosphere has now become all dominant and all powerful in human affairs. I think I hear a dog whining at my door.
It's like my cat next to having me as his doorman.
Yeah. Yep, sure enough. 2 of them. 3 of them. At least 3 decided to come in at once. Okay, so 1980 through 1986, triumph of the technosphere. The election of a second-rate American movie star for president, Ronald Reagan, and the birth of the yuppie generation in America. The rise of MTV signaled the standardization of rock style as the global culture, and on September 17, 1985, the Mexico City earthquake was the worst in modern times to hit the world's largest city and demonstrated the continuing vulnerability of the technosphere to natural catastrophe.
And I was there.
Were you there?
Yeah, I was 4 years old.
Wow.
It's one of my first memories.
I bet it is.
And I have that memory. I do remember.
Ow. So the early 1980s then witnesses the war on drugs, an aggressive anti-drug campaign waged by the West against narco traffic, yet the West was producing, the CIA was producing the narco traffic. Go figure.
Mm-hmm.
It was and still is.
And still is.
Yet drugs continued to be the major social problem in the industrialized West. The construction of Biosphere 2 in Arizona, which was an effort to test the possibility of establishing an artificial biosphere on other planets, ended inconclusively. Then in 1985, in Bhopal, India, the worst modern industrial toxic chemical disaster occurred with more than 2,000 deaths, followed on April 26, 1986, by the Chernobyl nuclear power plant disaster. And it's threatening to go again. Chernobyl, I've seen. So in America, the suburban automobile culture gives rise to the super shopping malls. The PC, personal computer, is introduced, electronic game arcades flourish, and Sunday football becomes a major American pastime, while TV makes world soccer the #1 competitive global sport. In 1987 to 1993, we have the end of the Cold War and the triumph of the G7, which just happened, the G7 meeting. In 1987, the Voyager sends us pictures from Uranus, and 4 days later, 7 American astronauts die in the shuttle launch explosion. On October 19, 1987, the New York stock market crashed, and 2 years later, Neptune and Saturn aligned like they are now. So in December 31, 1989, the Berlin Wall was torn down, the end of the Cold War. And in the summer of 1990, an international bankers reunion is followed by the first public meeting of the G7, which had been absolutely secret and organized by the CIA. Every year since then, they have met publicly, because no one protested that, to set the policies for globalization. And within a month of the first meeting, August 1990, Saddam invades Kuwait, paid for by the CIA, and Bush retaliates with the Gulf War. Do we see a pattern?
All connected.
All connected. 2 years later, in 1992, the Rio Summit, the second UN environmental conference, happened in Rio de Janeiro. It generated much paper, and the doctrine of sustainability, with its intent of sustainable industrial growth, was the principal outcome. That's why sustainability is $1 million buzzword that's guaranteed only to keep the corporations running, nothing else. 1994 to 2000 was the climax of globalization. I don't know about that. I don't know that that was the climax. I think it's continued to climax since then. But in 1994, 1 million Africans die in the Rwanda massacre. The indigenous uprising in Chiapas, Mexico, on January 1, 1994, provided a counterpoint to the triumph of globalization. I knew nothing about that in Chiapas. Do you?
Yeah, the rise of the Zapatistas, right? What year?
1994.
Yeah, rise of the Zapatistas, yeah, the guerrilla.
I think I might have heard something, but
You never heard of the Zapatistas?
Yes, I have, yeah. But
so that's when they rose. That movement was born, that guerrilla was born. There was a lot of big landowners in Chiapas, and so they rose up and killed them, and they took back the land. And since they put out a long agenda of at that time, now they've evolved and changed their message, but at a time they would, more than just freedom, they would kind of demand equal treatment by the government, because they would claim that they were being left out of progress, and they wouldn't get enough education, wouldn't get enough schooling, etc. Now they understand that even that demanding that is useless. So they're a very good autonomy school right now. They have their own schools. They have their own land. They're pretty autonomous right now.
Cool.
Though right now what they have to deal with right now is the newly settled narcos that just chose Chiapas now to settle, which is really awful.
Yeah.
Because back then there would be guerrillas, but there wouldn't be any narcos. And now there's narcos.
Yeah, of course there is. Of course there is. Hi. Okay, so that uprising provided a counterpoint to the triumph of globalization that is manifest through worldwide airport expansion. You know, you never think about this, how it's a, right? How airports became the focal point of globalization.
Hmm.
And the aggressive form of tourism that feeds the airline industry.
Hmm.
And we're seeing the results of this by countries saying, no, we're going to tax tourists because we've become such ravenous, stupid creatures that we go and fuck everything up that we go see.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
In 1995, a terrorist bomb destroys the Oklahoma City Federal Building, and the US and UK inaugurate control of the Iraqi no-fly zones enforced by regular bombing raids. This is the era of rapid expansion of computer and biotechnologies, the exponential rise of the New York Stock Exchange and the new specialized technologies exchange called the NASDAQ. Bill Gates of Microsoft typifies the rise of the new self-made millionaires of the Clinton era. And in January 1995, the Kyoto earthquake occurred, followed by the Tokyo subway nerve gas attack, while the internet is now fully up and running. And in 2000, the Y2K computer scare failed to materialize. And I remember that vividly. People were just so positive the end of the world was going to happen. I had friends burying gold bars and beans and rice and getting horses and buggies and prepared to be like the Amish. And nothing happened. Yeah. So 2001 through now, 2001 was the first year of the repeat of the Gregorian calendar years 1945 through 1973. End of the war, right? So in July 2001, the G7 meets in Genoa, Italy, as more than 100,000 anti-globalization protesters riot. And then, of course, in September, we have the Twin Towers event. And so artificial time warp now burst open, spawning in its wake the full-scale war on terrorism, which was another name for World War III.
Okay, so that World War III has already been going on.
We've been in World War III since 9/11. Yeah. It's a simple fact.
Mm-hmm.
Simple truth. 1945 cycle began with the end of one world war, and the 2001 cycle begins with the start of a global World War III that people just don't recognize is a world war. Yeah. Now it's only a matter of time before the technosphere experiences total collapse. So the time wars began with the application of the error in time in Sumeria when they discovered how to squeeze time in a two-dimensional plane, the circle with its 12-part division and the 60-second timing frequency. Since this measure does not correspond to the reality of time as universal 1320 frequency of synchronization, it creates a mental dissynchronization that manifests as a battle of the mind against itself and against nature. And this dynamic of dissynchronization results in an increasingly artificial technological means and reliance on the dead artificial medium of money to replace the biological or organic functions of our nature and the biosphere in general.
Wow.
And that's what every freaking spiritual guru out there that tells you money is spiritual. It's not. It is a dead commodity.
Yeah. The gurus that live off money.
Yeah. So the 56-year cycle of the technosphere witnessed the greatest creation and stockpiling of lethal weapons, more than in all the previous history put together, enough to destroy the Earth many times over. The 56-year cycle of the technosphere also witnessed the greatest plundering thus far of the biosphere. It was the Pentagon that has led the military spending and strategizing, just as it was the activity within the World Trade Center Twin Towers that dominated and coordinated from afar the plunder of the biosphere. So the world has gone flat, technically, and valueless, with no future vision beyond war. All the money in the world will not put it back together, nor will all the bombs in the world salvage it against its enemies, nor will all the bombs in the world salvage it against its enemies. The mechanical clock, though evolved over many centuries, was perfected just after the Gregorian calendar reform of 1582 and promoted by the Europeans as an example of human triumph over nature. And the human mind assumed as second nature its own invented time, encoded as the frequency of 1260 or 1240, or right, for the 40-hour week. The combination of these two factors in this one-time mean frequency have consigned historical man to a hopelessly debilitating mental disorder that is referred to as modern civilization. The only cure for this pervasive disorder is absolute freedom and harmony, unity and equality for all for eternity, which is love's, our creator's, or love's original intent. So we have 4 limbs, and each of our 4 extremities has 5 digits for a total of 20 fingers and toes that distinguish our human's operational capacity. So the 4 limbs conform to the 4 directions, while the 20 digits conform to the 20 factor of the 1320 ratio. So we also have 13 main joints: 2 ankles, 2 knees, 2 hips, 2 wrists, 2 elbows, and 2 shoulders, and neck. So these 6 pairs coordinate the 4 extremities with the body, while the 13th articulation, the neck and spinal column, coordinates the body proper. So that gives us our 1320 timing frequency for humans. These 13 main articulations plus the 20 digits of the hand and feet conspire to make the human the perfect exemplar of the 1320 kairos, or divine time, perfect timing frequency, serendipitous timing frequency that is the perfect model of serendipity. So while sunrise and sunset mark the passage of solar time, observing the phases of the moon keeps us in tune with the mystery of time. Both of these give us chronos time, which is the kind of the chronological order. But the Mayan calendar with its 1320 frequency is kairos time, the right time, the time of beauty, time of art, the time of serendipity.
Wow. That's a turnaround.
So in Udalvilles, we observe both. Because the chronos time, grandfather, son, a solar calendar and a lunar calendar give us the how to govern our daily lives and plant and grow and food for ourselves. And while the Mayan calendar with its 1320 frequency of serendipity gives us an idea of how to actually live in community.
Wow. So you said it all, and you went fast through it all.
Yeah, and there's been a lot. Man, I wish I could. That has happened since 2001. That I wish I had time to investigate, because there's even, well, we even talked about it with the. I mean, we've been through this with the globalization and the juntas and everything like that. We've talked about it all. We just haven't tied it so neatly together.
Yeah, and in a different way, and it's like a different pattern. So when
it's the same, but it's different. I mean, it's all got the same intent, you know.
Yeah, it's the same history, but then you make visible this different patterns of that history, and that's very helpful to understand and to visualize. And might seem like repetition, but it's not. exactly, and at the same time, it's just you can't, even us that we've gotten plenty of that. I'm not completely like, I don't get bored of this. It's like I want to know more. I want to know more. I mean, I'm pretty sure I have it clear that this whole thing has been a machined agenda to make us slaves, right?
Oh, absolutely.
I
Yeah.
want to know more details, and the more details I know, the better.
Right.
The
Well,
more I find ways to protect myself, and the better we can organize this curriculum and this our own agenda, if you want to call it, of becoming free, of building the new world.
freedom. Exactly. Which is the way of the Toltecs. The path of heart, as Don Juan said, if you're not following a path of heart, which is what we've talked about, as crafting. The ancient craftsmen followed the inner line of their heart. They walked the pathway of heart.
Yeah.
They weren't known as Toltecs, but they essentially were, because they were walking the pathway of heart, not product for product alone.
Right. Such a simple way to put it, huh? Well, what an amazing find, and what an amazing conversation. And what does this inspire us for next week?
Well, next week we're going to talk about light.
Light again.
Becoming illuminated by light. Yes, because we're going to learn to understand with this one how absolutely important the sunshine is, and the UV rays we've been taught to hate, how actually healthy they are.
Oh, you have to come here. You would have to have been here. Just today we got like at least an hour or 2 hours of sunshine through the clouds. After like 15 days, I don't know how long we were in just deep rain.
Oh, man.
And there you will physically feel this you're talking about.
Oh, yeah. No.
And I think people up north also feel it, right? They also feel, the people that live in like in Scandinavia, they've told me, I've never been there, but they've told me about the lamps they have.
Yeah, the sun lamps, yeah.
Because that's such a health. I mean, it's also my energy has been.
Well, we're going to understand how important it is. We're going to show ourselves scientifically just how important it is.
Yeah, so I'm looking forward to hearing that. I've been experiencing it. It's like if I can only charge my battery up to 20% when it's been like a week without a single minute of sunshine.
Yeah.
Which I went through a whole week or more of not a single minute. After like a week, I got like 10 minutes of sunshine, but that's not even a lot. And then until today, I finally got like an hour, and I went out and tried to take it, but then I have to do other things, and so I didn't take that much, but we're coming out of that. It's going to be very interesting, and I love to hear the details, the technical details, which we always cover. So it's going to be the light. What's the title going to be?
Let me see here. Light for healing ourselves. That's what
light for healing.
Yeah.
Okay. Light for healing ourselves. So we're inviting you, folks, listeners, to join us for that conversation next week.
Actually, before we go into that, let's since we just left the tecnosphere, let's talk about a self-provisioning economy again.
Okay.
Let's talk about a self-provisioning freedom economy, and then we'll go into light after that.
Self-provisioning freedom economy. Okay.
Freedom economy. Let's just label it freedom economy.
Okay, freedom economy. So there we will have the opportunity then to talk about what Aini Aloha Aini Now Living does.
Yes. One piece of it.
focal points, and that's interesting that you bring that up, because not a few days ago I got also a revelation of the importance of economy, and how the pillar of economic sovereignty can be described in a much more simple manner. Maybe that's you coming up with those
Well,
words.
we've got we're going to hear the words matriarchal and gift economy, but with all this, and then subsistence economy will come into it too. But I think we just need to get rid of those words and just say freedom economy.
Okay. Alrighty. Well, an amazing chat then. An amazing topic we will explore next week.
So much. It's like, what do we pick? But since we just finished the technosphere, let's talk about what's the solution to the technosphere and the debt economy, the blood money it's created is the freedom economy.
Okay. Alrighty. So there's the invitation, and we will let you go now, folks. We will see you next week, and hopefully you can leave a comment or ask anything. Anything you ask will be answered.
Yeah.
And as well as if you visit the website alohainidalliving.com, any message we get, it gets answered. So please feel free to do that, and understand that we don't play important, busy expert roles. We are grassroots. We are open-hearted. We are in the path of the heart.
We are freedom rangers.
In the path of the heart, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. Amazing. So thank you, everyone. Thank you, Blue Heron Woman. And we'll see each other next week.
Yeah.